Hello, my dearest listeners, and welcome back to the Midnight Archive. I'm your host, and tonight, we are unlocking a file that sits at the nexus of genius and madness. This is a story for those of you who appreciate the intricate clockwork of a brilliant mind, even when that mind is dedicated to the most chilling of pastimes. Before we proceed, if you are a fan of these explorations into the complex and the macabre, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell. It ensures you won't miss a single file from our archive. Now, extinguish your lamps, quiet your thoughts, and prepare to meet the woman for whom an unsolvable puzzle is an invitation, and murder is simply the most elegant of hobbies. This is Her IQ is a Weapon. Her hobby is murder. Detective Isabella Rossi stood in the dead man's sanctuary and felt the profound, suffocating weight of impossibility. The room was a monument to paranoia, tucked away in the heart of a penthouse that sprawled across the entire top floor of London's newest and most obnoxious skyscraper. The panic room was Marcus Thorne's £9 million monument to his own self-importance. And now it was his tomb. Thorne, a tech billionaire who had built an empire on invasive data mining algorithms, lay slumped in a custom-built leather armchair. There was no sign of struggle. His eyes were open, fixed on a bank of security monitors that now showed only static. A glass of what looked like single malt scotch rested on the table beside him, untouched. The coroner, a dour man named Dr. Evans, had already given his preliminary assessment. Massive cardiac arrest. Natural causes. Except, as Rossi knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, it was anything but natural. "Let's go over it again, Miller," she said, her voice low. Her partner, Detective Sergeant Ben Miller, a large, weary man who had seen too much to be surprised by anything, sighed and ticked the points off on his fingers. The room was sealed from the inside. The door is a 6-inch slab of reinforced titanium composite. It can only be opened from within by Thorne's biometric signature thumbprint and retinal scanner by a 24-hour lockdown override known only by his head of security, who was in Dubai. "We have confirmation." "The ventilation system?" Rossi asked, her eyes scanning every inch of the sterile, climate-controlled space. "A closed-loop oxygen scrubber and air filtration system. Nothing in, nothing out. We had the hazmat team check it. The air is cleaner in here than it is in a surgical theater. No airborne toxins. No foreign particulates. The body. No marks, no wounds, no signs of injection. Dr. Evans is confident, but he'll know more after the autopsy. Right now, he's sticking to a heart attack brought on by stress. The man lived on caffeine and ambition. Rossi walked over to the desk. It was obsessively neat. A single tablet, a Montblanc pen perfectly aligned with the edge of a leather blotter, and the untouched glass of scotch. He gets into his panic room, seals the door, pours a drink he doesn't touch, and then his heart just gives out. "It's London. It happens," Miller grumbled, but he didn't believe it any more than she did. Rossi was not a genius, not in the way the papers sometimes portrayed her. She was a bricklayer. She saw crimes not as grand, theatrical events, but as structures built of lies. Her job was to find the one brick that didn't fit, the one inconsistency, and push. She would keep pushing until the entire edifice of deception came crashing down. Here, however, there were no bricks. There was only a smooth, seamless wall of impossibility. A man had died in a hermetically sealed room with no weapon, no poison, and no killer. It was a perfect, elegant equation. And that's what terrified her. This wasn't a crime of passion or greed. It was a statement. It was a proof. 2 miles away, in a minimalist apartment overlooking Regent's Canal, Dr. Eris Thorne, no relation to the deceased, a coincidence she found endlessly amusing, watched a live news feed on a frameless monitor that covered an entire wall. A reporter stood shivering in the wind, the Thorne Tower looming behind her, spouting the same inane theories the police were undoubtedly considering. Eris took a sip of her oolong tea and allowed herself a small, controlled smile. It was all so predictable. They were looking for a method, a physical key to a metaphysical lock. They were searching for a ghost in the machine, never considering that the machine itself could be the ghost. Her gaze drifted to the chessboard on her glass table. The pieces were hand-carved from obsidian and alabaster, each one a miniature work of art. She picked up the Black Queen, her fingers tracing its cold, smooth lines. This was her hobby, not the act of killing itself that was merely the execution of a final step, often disappointingly mundane. Her hobby was the puzzle. Marcus Thorne had been a particularly satisfying puzzle. A boorish, arrogant man who believed his wealth could insulate him from the fundamental frailties of the world. His panic room was the ultimate expression of that arrogance, a fortress of technology. But Eris knew that any system, no matter how complex, had an exploit. You just had to have the intellect to find it. She hadn't needed to bypass the door or poison the air. She hadn't needed to touch him at all. Her weapon had been information, her delivery system the very technology in which he had placed his faith. Months ago, she had breached Thorne's personal network, a feat of social engineering and quantum decryption that was, in her opinion, a far more elegant intellectual exercise than the murder itself. She had gained access to his medical records, his psychological profile, his entire digital life. She discovered he had a rare, undiagnosed cardiac condition, a specific arrhythmia that could be triggered by a precise sequence of subsonic frequencies. The frequencies would be imperceptible to the human ear, but they would vibrate through the dense air of the sealed room, creating a resonance that would, quite literally, shake his heart apart. The delivery system, the state-of-the-art server bank inside the panic room itself. She had simply embedded a tiny, malicious code into a routine software update for his security system a week prior. The code was programmed to activate only when a specific set of parameters were met. The door being sealed, the internal atmospheric pressure reaching a certain level, and Thorne's biometric signature being the last one registered. Once triggered, the server's cooling fans would vibrate at the precise, deadly frequencies for 90 seconds. To any diagnostic, it would look like a minor, temporary hardware glitch. To Marcus Thorne, it was a death sentence delivered by the very walls of his sanctuary. No poison, no weapon, no trace. An elegant equation perfectly solved. She placed the Black Queen back on her square. Now came the part she truly enjoyed, watching the other side try to solve it. She scanned the news articles, her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, flitting past the names of police officials and city leaders until they landed on one. Detective Isabella Rossi. Eris brought up a file on Rossi. It was a personal file, one she had compiled herself. She knew about Rossi's solve rate, her reputation for relentless tenacity. She had read Rossi's published paper from her university days on the psychology of motive in aberrant criminal cases. Rossi wasn't just another plodding copper. She had a mind that saw in patterns, that looked for the narrative behind the crime. A genuine smile, the first of the day, touched Eris Thorne's lips. The game was boring without a worthy opponent. "Let's see what you're made of, detective," she whispered to the empty room. A week later, Rossi was no closer to an answer. The autopsy had confirmed cardiac arrest, but the toxicologist had found something anomalous. A specific protein marker in the blood indicating extreme, resonant cellular stress in the heart tissue. It was like the organ had been vibrated to death. The finding was so bizarre, so unprecedented, that it was dismissed as a statistical anomaly, a quirk of Thorne's unique physiology. But for Rossi, it was the first brick that didn't fit. She was sitting at her desk late one night, the Thorne case files spread around her like the feathers of a dismembered bird, when an email arrived in her inbox. It was from an anonymous, encrypted source. The subject line contained a single word: resonance. Her blood ran cold. She opened it. The body of the email was empty, save for a short, embedded audio file. Her hand trembled as she clicked play. There was no music, no voice. It was a low, almost imperceptible hum. A subsonic frequency. She played it again, her mind racing, connecting the sound to the coroner's report, to the sealed room, to the server banks. The brick wasn't just loose. It had been handed to her. This wasn't just a murder. It was a lecture. The killer was teaching her, guiding her. And with that chilling realization came another. The killer knew she was the one investigating. They had sought her out. She looked around the bustling, fluorescent-lit office, at the tired faces of her colleagues, and felt a profound sense of isolation. She was no longer just investigating a crime. She was a player in a game she didn't understand, her opponent a faceless, intellectual phantom who had just made the opening move. And Rossi had a terrible feeling that the price of losing this game would be far higher than just an unsolved case. The anonymous email had changed everything. It had transformed the Thorn case from a frustrating anomaly into a terrifying dialogue. Rossi felt as though she were standing on one side of a chasm, her unseen adversary on the other, communicating not with threats or demands, but with clues that were equal parts taunt and lesson. Resonance. It was a breadcrumb, a deliberate offering of knowledge. She had taken the audio file to the department's tech forensics unit. Their report was baffling. The frequency was largely in the subsonic range, but it wasn't a single tone. It was a complex, layered sequence of frequencies, a chord played in a key only machines and specific human tissues could hear. They confirmed that, theoretically, such a resonance could cause cellular damage, but the application was something out of science fiction. "It's a ghost, I say," Miller had said, rubbing his temples. "We're hunting a ghost who kills with sound waves." But Rossi knew it wasn't a ghost. It was a person of terrifying intellect, someone who saw the world not as a series of human interactions, but as a system of physical laws to be manipulated. And they wanted her to know that. They wanted her to appreciate their genius. This understanding was the key. Her opponent was not driven by greed or passion. They were driven by ego. The perfect crime was meaningless if no one was smart enough to recognize its perfection. This wasn't a killer. It was an artist in need of a critic. 2 weeks passed. The media lost interest. Thorn's company appointed a new CEO, and the official cause of death remained cardiac arrest under unusual circumstances. The case went cold, but for Rossi it burned hotter than ever. She spent her nights reading textbooks on acoustic engineering and theoretical physics, falling down rabbit holes of information she barely understood, searching for the mindset of the person on the other side of the chasm. Then came the second body. Judge Alistair Finch was one of the most feared and respected jurists in the country. He was known as the Cartesian Judge for his cold, unassailable logic and his famous declaration that emotion is a flaw in the code of justice. He was a man who lived by rules, by order, by predictable systems. He was found in his study, a room as severe and ordered as his legal opinions, dead in his chair. This time the cause was clear. A single, precise puncture wound at the base of his skull, delivered by what appeared to be an ice pick. The weapon was missing. The room was locked from the inside, the key still in the lock. The only other entrance was a large bay window that overlooked a sheer 3-story drop into a walled garden. With no footprints, no disturbed soil, nothing. Once again, Rossi was faced with an impossible room. "It's him," she said to Miller as they stood in the silent, oppressive study. "Or her. Copycat," Miller suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. "No," Rossi said, her eyes sweeping the room. "This is the same signature. Not the method, the philosophy. A man who prides himself on logic, killed in a way that defies it." The details were maddening. The lock was a simple, old-fashioned mortise lock. No electronics to hack. The window was latched from the inside. The forensics team dusted for prints and found only the judge's. It was another perfect equation. As the team worked, Rossi stood back, trying to see the room not as a collection of objects, but as a statement. What was the killer trying to say? Her eyes fell on the judge's desk. On it was a chessboard, a game in progress. Rossi, a passable player herself, recognized the position. It was a famous endgame, a puzzle by the great chess composer, ready. It was a position where the white king, seemingly hopelessly far away, could achieve a draw through a series of surprising, counterintuitive moves. A demonstration of impossible geometry. Felt like a clue, a piece of the killer's personality. In her apartment, Eris Thorne cleaned her tools with the meticulous care of a surgeon. The murder weapon had been a custom-fabricated ceramic stylet, as strong as steel but transparent to metal detectors. The delivery system had been the true work of art. She had, again, done her research, Judge Finch had a weakness, a secret, all-consuming passion for horology, the study of clocks. He was a collector of rare and complex timepieces. Eris, posing as a Swiss heiress selling a deceased father's collection, had begun a correspondence with him months earlier. She had tantalized him with descriptions of a one-of-a-kind Patek Philippe, a grand complication he had coveted for years. The clock she finally sent him for inspection was, in fact, a machine of her own design. Outwardly, it was a beautiful, antique long-case clock. Inwardly, it was a weapon. Hidden within the clock's complex gearing was a pneumatic mechanism, powered by the clock's own weights. The night of the murder, Eris had simply placed a call to the judge's private line. When he answered, she spoke a single, prearranged code word from their correspondence. The word was a voice-activated trigger. A tiny receiver in the clock recognized her vocal print and activated the mechanism. A near-silent burst of compressed air fired the ceramic stylet from a hidden aperture in the clock's face, across the room, and into the precise spot at the base of Finch's skull. The stylet was attached to a micro-thin, high-tensile filament. A second mechanism then retracted the filament, pulling the stylet back into the clock and wiping the wound clean of any fragments. The clock had then sealed the aperture, leaving no trace of its deadly function. It was a murder committed by a piece of furniture, triggered by a word spoken miles away. A perfect, logical absurdity. A Cartesian gambit. She had enjoyed this one. It had required engineering, psychology, and a flair for the dramatic. And she had left a clue for her favorite detective. The ready endgame on the chessboard wasn't just for show. It was a message. Look for the unconventional move. The solution is not where you think it is. Her real gambit, however, was happening that very evening. She knew Rossi would be at the crime scene for hours. And she knew, from her surveillance, that Rossi lived alone. Rossi returned to her small flat well after midnight, her mind a maelstrom of locked rooms and chess puzzles. The smell of antiseptic and death still clung to her clothes. All she wanted was a hot shower and a few hours of dreamless sleep. As she walked into her living room, she stopped dead. Everything was as she had left it, but there was one thing that was different. On her small coffee table, next to a stack of books on forensics, sat a single gleaming white alabaster chess piece. A white king. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She drew her service weapon, her heart hammering against her ribs. She cleared the flat room by room. It was empty. There was no sign of forced entry. Whoever had left the chess piece had bypassed the 3 separate locks on her door as if they were made of paper. They had been here, in her home, in her private space. The message was brutally clear. The chasm between them had vanished. The killer was no longer on the other side. They were standing right behind her, breathing down her neck. This was no longer a game of intellect. It had become personal. Taped to the bottom of the chess piece was a tiny, folded piece of paper. With trembling fingers, she unfolded it. Contained a single typewritten sentence. A quote from René Descartes, the father of logic, the philosopher for whom Judge Finch was nicknamed. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. But Rossi understood the implied, chilling addendum from her opponent. I think, therefore you are. My plaything. She sank onto her sofa, the gun feeling heavy and useless in her hand. For the first time in her career, Detective Isabella Rossi was truly afraid. She wasn't just hunting a killer anymore. She was being hunted by a mind, and she was beginning to suspect that it was a mind far greater than her own. The white king on her coffee table was a declaration of war. The sanctity of Rossi's home had been violated. The professional distance between hunter and hunted erased with terrifying ease. She felt exposed, analyzed, a specimen under a microscope. For 2 days, she barely slept, jumping at every creak of the floorboards, seeing a phantom presence in every shadow. She had her locks changed and a security system installed, but she knew it was a futile gesture. A mind that could kill with sound waves and antique clocks would not be deterred by a simple deadbolt. Her opponent, this ghost she had named Moriarty, in the privacy of her own thoughts, was escalating. The murders were intellectual exercises, But the communication was becoming deeply personal. Moriarty wasn't just proving their intelligence. They were dissecting Rossi's. They knew she was a chess player. They knew her address. The quote from Descartes was the cruelest cut of Allah reminder that this was a battle of pure intellect, and she was dangerously outmatched. Miller saw the change in her. The relentless energy had been replaced by afraid, paranoid tension. "I say, you need to step back," he'd urged. "You're letting this thing get inside your head. That's what it wants." "It's already inside, Ben," she had replied, her voice flat. "It's living in my flat and drinking my coffee. I have to finish this." She knew she couldn't win by playing Moriarty's game. Trying to match wits with a supergenius was a fool's errand. She couldn't outthink them. But maybe, just maybe, she could outfeel them. Moriarty was a creature of pure logic, of systems and equations. Their one blind spot, their one potential vulnerability, had to be the messy, unpredictable, illogical realm of human emotion. Their ego was an emotion. Their need for recognition was an emotion. These were the flaws in their code. Rossi stopped focusing on the how. The methods were brilliant, but they were distractions, theatrical flourishes. She started focusing on the why. Not why they killed, but why they chose their victims. Marcus Thorne, a man who built a fortress of technology. Judge Finch, a man who built a fortress of logic. Both were men who believed they could create an ordered, controllable world, free from chaos. Moriarty hadn't just killed them. They had refuted them, dismantling their philosophies with their very deaths. Who would be next? Who else represented a system of order that a God-complex-driven killer would want to dismantle? Her blood ran cold as she thought of the one system that Moriarty was currently engaged with, the one system they were actively trying to prove their superiority over, the justice system itself. The police. And who was the public face of that system in this case? Who was the opponent Moriarty was so desperately trying to impress? It was her. She was the next victim. But Moriarty wouldn't just kill her. It would be too simple, too crude. They would want to dismantle her, to refute everything she stood for. They would frame her. They would use the system she represented to crush her. It would be their ultimate masterpiece. Eris Thorne was preparing her endgame. The game with Rossi had been the most stimulating intellectual pursuit of her life, but all games must come to an end. And the ending had to be perfect. Framing the detective was the logical, most aesthetically pleasing conclusion. It was the ultimate subversion, the puzzle solver becoming the puzzle, the agent of order becoming the symbol of chaos. Her plan was a symphony of misdirection and digital forgery. Over the past weeks, she had been carefully laying the groundwork. She created a trail of encrypted financial transactions, routing money from offshore accounts linked to Thorne and Finch's enemies into a new account opened in Rossi's name. She synthesized Rossi's voice from hours of recorded phone calls and interviews, creating a digital ghost that could leave incriminating voicemails. The final piece was the physical evidence. She had manufactured a perfect replica of the ceramic stylet used to kill Judge Finch. Now she just had to plant it. But she wouldn't break into Rossi's flat again. That was too crude, too repetitive. Instead, she would make Rossi bring the evidence into her own life. Eris knew Rossi had an estranged younger brother, a struggling artist with a history of minor drug offenses. It was the kind of messy, emotional connection Eris herself found contemptible, but for Rossi, it was a profound vulnerability. Posing as a wealthy art patron, Eris commissioned a sculpture from the brother, paying him an exorbitant amount of money. The sculpture was a large, abstract piece made of metal and reclaimed wood. Deep within its structure, sealed behind a welded plate, was the replica weapon. The patron arranged for the sculpture to be delivered not to her own address, but to Rossi's flat as a surprise gift of reconciliation for his sister. It was perfect. Rossi's own brother, her own emotional blind spot, would be the delivery system for her downfall. The call came from a panicked Ben Miller. "I say, you need to get down to the station. Now, the top brass are here. They're convening a special hearing." When Rossi arrived, the atmosphere was icy. The deputy chief inspector laid it all out. The financial trail, the expert analysis of a threatening voicemail left for Judge Finch before his death. all in a perfect imitation of her voice. "This is insane," Rossi stammered. "Someone is setting me up." "We're looking into it, Isabella," the DCI said, his face unreadable. "But for now, you're suspended. Surrender your badge and weapon." The final, crushing blow came an hour later. An anonymous tip had led a search team to her flat. They had found the sculpture from her brother. An X-ray had revealed a foreign object inside. They were cutting it open as they spoke. Rossi felt the trap closing. She was checkmated. Moriarty had won. She sat in the sterile interrogation room, the world crumbling around her. She had failed. The ghost in the machine had beaten her. And then she remembered the White King. She remembered the ready endgame. Look for the unconventional move. The solution is not where you think it is. She had been looking at the board, trying to counter Moriarty's moves. She needed to stop looking at the board and start looking at the player. What did Moriarty want more than anything? Recognition, acknowledgement of their genius. They wouldn't just let her be arrested and disgraced in a quiet, bureaucratic hearing. That wasn't dramatic enough. They would want to be there. They would want to watch the final, beautiful collapse of their opponent. "The anonymous tip," Rossi said aloud to the empty room. "The timing is too perfect." The tip-off call had to have come from Moriarty. And in that call, in that single, final interaction with the system she was manipulating, she might have made her first mistake. A mistake born not of logic, but of ego. Rossi called Miller on her personal phone. "Ben, I need a favor. Pull the source audio from the anonymous tip-off that sent the search team to my flat. Don't let anyone know. Run it through a deep-level vocal analysis. I'm looking for a ghost." While Miller worked, Rossi closed her eyes and pieced it all together. The resonant frequency that killed Thorne. The voice-activated clock that killed Finch. The synthesized voice that framed her. Her opponent was a master of sound, of frequencies, of acoustics. A digital phantom. But every phantom has an origin. Every voice has a speaker. An hour later, Miller burst into the room, his face pale. "You're not going to believe this, ISA." The tip-off call was digitally masked, run through a dozen scramblers. But the tech boys found something underneath it all. A trace, a unique vocal fingerprint. It's almost untraceable, but they got a partial match. To a series of encrypted academic papers published under a pseudonym years ago. Papers on cognitive resonance and bioacoustics. "Is there a name?" Rossi asked, her heart pounding. "No name," Miller said, handing her a printout. "Just a research grant. Awarded to a reclusive child prodigy. Dr. Eris Thorne." The name hit Rossi like a physical blow. Thorne, the same as the first victim. The coincidence was no coincidence at all. It was a signature hidden in plain sight. "She's been watching," Rossi whispered. "She's been here all along." She knew what she had to do. There would be no arrest, no dramatic raid. That was the old game. The new game required an unconventional move. She leaked the name to a single, trusted journalist. Eris Thorne was watching the news, a glass of champagne in her hand, ready to toast her victory, when the breaking news banner scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Breaking. Police investigating reclusive prodigy. Dr. Eris Thorne in connection with impossible crimes. Her name, her actual name. It was out. The champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered on the polished concrete floor. This was wrong. This wasn't how the game was supposed to end. The beauty was in the anonymity, the intellectual purity of it. Rossi wasn't supposed to find her name. She was supposed to be crushed by the evidence. Her carefully ordered world began to fracture. The police would be on their way. They would tear her apartment apart, her lab, her sanctuary. They would be clumsy, brutish. They wouldn't understand the elegance of her work. They would just see the crime. She looked at her chessboard. The game was ruined. Rossi hadn't won by making a better move on the board. She had kicked the whole table over. She had used the messy, chaotic, illogical weapon of the media. She had refused to play by the rules. When the police tactical team finally smashed through her door, they found her not hiding, not fighting, but sitting calmly in front of her monitor, which displayed a single, massive image. The face of Detective Isabella Rossi. Eris didn't resist. As they cuffed her, her stormy gray eyes met the camera of a news helicopter hovering outside her window. She knew Rossi would be watching. She allowed herself a small, final smile. It was not a smile of victory, but one of grudging respect. A nod from one grandmaster to another. The equation was finally solved. The ghost had been found in the machine. Not with logic, not with forensics, but with a deep understanding that the most brilliant of minds can be undone by the simplest of human flaws, the desperate, burning need to be seen.